My name is Dave LaForce. I'm a board member of Newport Downtown Development. I also chair the Economic Task Force. As many of you probably know, Newport Downtown Development signed an MOU with the city of Newport to manage the process of developing an enhanced master plan to lead Newport for the next 10 to 100 years down the road. So we engaged with VHB, so the team with VHB is with us tonight, Christine, Michael, and Jeff. They're kind of lead the meeting in the beginning. They're going to do a presentation on what their work is and has been. And then after their presentation, we're going to roll into a question and comment period where Rick will facilitate and get your comments and questions, and so we can address them. So I will hand off to Christine.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us. We were here this summer, first time, for a project kickoff site walk, and we attended the annual meeting, which exceeded my expectations. Just a great. Not that my expectations were low, but it was really a rich evening, and so it's wonderful to be back. Let me know if you can't hear me at the back, and I will shout. So we are here tonight to talk about this City of Newport Master Plan update, as Dave mentioned. And we're going to give a brief presentation about what this is and why we're here, what we hope to accomplish, and as Dave mentioned, leave plenty of time for what we hope is a fruitful discussion and comment period as well. All right, so our team have already been introduced. My name is Christine Vermondo. I'm an urban planner with VHB. Michael Willard and Jeff Doobie, my colleagues, are here with me. We have other folks who are touching this project as well. This is really the core team. We were here this summer too, and we also have another consultant we've been working with, John Stover and Associates, who is working on one piece of economic analysis that I'll mention a little bit later as well. All right, so why are we here? So I would like to pause on the word update. So we are here for a master plan update, and I think that word update deserves a little bit of explanation. This community has done tremendous planning work. You have a waterfront and downtown master plan from 2018. Michael Willard was actually the lead on that plan. You have a 2022 citywide plan, which actually references that waterfront and downtown master plan, echoes it, affirms it in certain ways, but goes beyond it and looks at other topics as well. And a variety of other planning efforts that you have taken on with energy over the last decade plus. So an update is not, we're not going in to revise these documents. We value these documents as establishing certain community goals, certain community vision. And what we're here to do with this update is what I think of as the next step, as looking at how we might take some of that vision, some of those goals, and start to ask a little more finely grained questions about how we might move some of those questions and some of those goals to fruition. So just a moment on those past planning documents I mentioned, which do touch on themes we'll be talking about tonight. How do we use our public spaces? How do we make Main Street a hub? What do we do with our physical infrastructure and fabric? How are we using our urban spaces and connecting the different parts of town together? Similarly, your municipal plan sets a lot of really valuable goals for who you are as a community, where you hope to head, and looks at some overlapping things like your parking and your vacant lots and your public buildings and your zoning, and sets a community vision and affirms a community vision. So what are we doing with this master plan update? We are looking, we don't have as much breadth as say your citywide master plan. What we are doing is taking a closer look at a shorter list of questions. We're looking at certain development sites, looking at questions of housing, particularly housing as it intersects with your downtown, your workforce needs, infrastructure to support growth, including transportation infrastructure, and financing tools as well. So our study area, this is an outline of your designated downtown. It is largely focused on this downtown area, but also looking at and open to discussions about contiguous areas around your downtown, how they flow into your downtown, how they might represent certain sorts of potential for change or key connections. I talked about that already, a little out of order there. But actually, this is a little bit of a different way of speaking about why a master plan update. So I want to start with where we are standing right now. There is so much that is really wonderful about your downtown. Planners like to use a term that probably too much, they talk about a place having good bones. This place has fantastic bones, right? You have all these makings of a very vibrant place. These historic patterns of how cities and villages were built are just the envy of much of the country, really. And there's really a lot that's working well. And yet, we know not everything is working well. And so how do we build on what we think is most lovable, most desirable about what's there and what the future may bring as well? We've got vacancies, as you know, quite a few. We've got expanses of pavement, perhaps where you don't need it or too much or in the wrong configurations. Things like intersection configurations, surface parking. Surface parking is a big one, I would say. Parking is a great topic, I think, for any community thinking about growth and what sort of amounts and configuration your parking should be in, because it really ultimately, we need it, and it ultimately has a huge impact on the look and feel of a place. So I'm gonna move on to some of the elements of this master plan update. So downtown development, site analysis, this is really central to the exercise and the study that we're doing. We're looking at certain sites that that perhaps are underdeveloped or could have more happening on them, and saying, well, what could happen? What could it look like in scale, in mixtures of uses? What might the market want? Why aren't things happening there potentially now? And this could mean starting fresh on a site. Could mean a vacant lot. What could be there? It could mean taking a building down. What could be there? It could also mean new buildings on an existing site and building around existing buildings, or augmenting or additions, things like that. And so here are a few of the sites we've looked at, and there are additional ones as well. And we brought a board of downtown, and I have another graphic of some of the sites we were paying special attention to talk about those in particular, if anyone is curious, well, what sites you're looking at besides the ones right here on the screen right now. Housing. So these are headlines from around the state about what some would call a crisis of housing in the state of Vermont. And by the state of Vermont, that's an acknowledgement that this is something that is not just a local issue, that is rippling across the region, really. But every community, including Newport, has their own story to tell about what are your housing challenges and how might you solve for them, right? And you have a lot of challenges. You had a greater population loss, greater household loss, quicker rise in housing costs than both the county and the state. There's some remarkable trend lines there. Very little new construction happening or new housing creation. New housing creation isn't always in new buildings, right? There you might have, that could mean a single family home that becomes a duplex, or it could mean a new building. Very little new housing being permitted at the moment as well. And besides there being demand for this housing and real sort of equity and other fiscal implications for what it means that there's this rise or not enough available, real implications for your workforce as well. If you're trying to attract and retain a workforce, having that housing availability is really critical. I have a couple of graphics here that I picked out of some of our preliminary analysis. The top right shows Newport, on the bottom in dark blue. Housing sale prices well below the state of Vermont overall, fairly close to the county, and all of them rising. But you can see in the end, the last couple of years, it's rising a little bit more steeply than those other lines are. And the bottom graphic shows that blue line is the percent change in median sales price between 20 and 23, and it is changing faster in greater magnitude again than Vermont or the county. So that is interesting, and that's I'd say also a challenge if you think of it in terms of, well, what are local wages, what are other factors that are going to kind of be impacted by those rising house costs. 32% of households are cost burdened. That means they're spending too much on housing right now. That's not a great number. It's also not a number really out of step with the county or the state. Right now it's a common number. We should all aspire to a lower number there, but it's substantial but not out of whack with your surrounds, with your context. There are a lot of opportunities as well. One thing that I think is really interesting to think about looking at these numbers, housing creation, housing stats, housing trends, is really that Newport has more in common with your housing stock and characteristics than with other cities and really robust downtowns, regardless of where they are economically right now, in terms of commuting patterns, in terms of, say, percentage of single-family homes versus other kinds of things, versus in terms of job-home balance of how many of your workers live where they work. Newport's got more in common with Brattleboro, with Montpelier, than it does, say, Newport Town or the county. So it is just, for me, it's really interesting to think, yes, it is helpful to think about your role in your immediate surrounds and with your immediately surrounding communities, but it's also helpful to think about sort of comparing like to like, or what are communities that are cities that have an urban core, or even villages that have a strong urban core. What are they going through, and what are they doing in terms of housing creation as well? So back to the idea of opportunities, the diversity of a housing stock, it's really, if you think about housing as sort of an ecosystem metaphor, that's about resilience, right? It is good to have a diversity of types of housings, whether that's apartment, single-family homes, fixed affordable housing or rental assistance versus market rate, different sizes, particularly for a community like this that is not a suburban community, that is not a rural community. That's tremendously important, no matter how it's doing right now, that housing stock, but for capturing sort of future vitality and mixture of people who are going to be in your future. That diversity of housing stock is an asset to build upon. And sort of in the future, as we look to more housing creation, the idea of keeping a diversity of housing types, I think, is very important. It's part of what makes the downtown walkable. That concentrate, it's not just the layout of streets and lots, very important, but that concentration of people. Density is your friend, right? Again, not more cross burden than the county or the state, just in terms of sort of how unaffordable is it right now. It could be better, but you're not really out of step with big trends that are kind of plaguing lots of communities, that communities are struggling with right now. You've got a mixture of rentals and homeowner units. Again, I think a strength. I don't know what a perfect balance of homeowner units and rentals are, but having that mixture, I think, really gives you lots of options in terms of the sort of people you're going to attract and retain here in the community. House size trends are actually going downward. That's true in a lot of places. That's not necessarily what will always be the trend line. I think that's something a community can offset or influence depending on what sort of housing is being built, but you certainly have enough stock to kind of speak to some of those, well, not sufficient stock, I would say, but some of the stock to speak to some of that trend about smaller households. And you have a great, relatively speaking, jobs housing balance, and I think, again, that is something to think about as an asset and something to think about improving on even so. So I think to sort of capture a couple of summary points in terms of housing, there's great demand there. You've got an affordability issue, you've got a quantity issue where you need more, and you need more of all types of different price points. Certainly different price points from a market rate perspective as well. Market rate just means something that is not sort of subsidized or controlled in terms of what it costs. It can mean a $600 apartment. It can mean an $800,000 house. It just means what sort of housing is being built like in a free market sense without subsidies. And it's tremendously important for overall affordability that quantity of housing is allowed to grow, that there's some, that removal of obstacles and hopefully incentives are there to help with that housing creation, because I think right now there's a scarcity issue, which is in turn impacting that cost issue. We're looking at infrastructure. If you're going to grow, you need infrastructure for sustainable growth. So it's water, sewer, roads, transportation, sidewalks, open space, waterfront. We're particularly looking at certain key factors around transportation and road infrastructure, as well as water sewer capacity. If we're to experience growth, do we have the capacity right now? If not, how do we look ahead towards sort of tools to increase capacity, for instance? Tax increment financing. So I mentioned funding sources. This is not the only tool available to help spur or fund development, but we are, a TIF, as they're called, is one key tool we're looking at. And we have one portion of the study is economic analysis about what sort of use, what sort of project would be the most catalyzing for a downtown and potentially bring the most revenue back into a community if it were to be a TIF recipient. So what a TIF does, it uses public investment, public funds to construct infrastructure for private investment. And the premise is that private investment, if it's not happening, it needs some sort of help. So it's considered a public-private partnership. That private investment in turn eventually will raise local tax revenues, which help you pay off that infrastructure. So it's a little of a complicated funding tool, financial tool, but it's tremendously important. And if the city were to pursue this, it will need local approval, it will need state approval, and there's a process a public process for discussing what are the best uses of TIF and what should those projects be. So a couple of examples around the state. There are a number of them around the state. Killington's is pretty new, and I highlighted Killington not because they've done that much with it yet, but what I find interesting about Killington is that since getting their TIF approved, they've also been the recipient of other grant dollars and other funding sources. It's been a source of momentum and confidence building, and it has already brought in other dollars, which in turn has lowered the public responsibility in terms of debt and what the public's approved. And so they are on the move with their TIF, and it's really interesting to watch that play out. It's under a year, maybe half a year since it's been approved. St. Albans, the Newport Downtown's annual meeting had a wonderful presentation by, I believe, the city manager and the city planner about all they've done and their approach and why they have pursued a TIF and used it to great advantage, and how the city has engaged in various public-private partnerships, including buying property and property disposition and trying to court the sort of development they wish to see. And it's working really well for streetscape improvements, for helping with housing creation, parking creation, and a variety of other things as well. And then Winooski just wrapped up 20 years and just closed out their TIF. They've done quite a lot with it. This is not a full list, but it's probably the most recent full increment we could look at of what did they do in 20 years and quite a bit. So there's a few examples. I'm almost wrapped up here. That's sort of the major areas of what we're looking at. Infrastructure, housing, what is viable for TIFs, site analysis, getting very specific into particular sites, what might happen, what can they sustain, and walking through that exercise in the hopes that we can, again, move some of these questions and actually spur investment in one or more of these sites that in turn will inspire greater investment in the downtown. So I'm going to pause there. I think, Rick, you're going to lead Q&A. The way I'd like to leave this off is we're open to anything we hear tonight and welcome any feedback, what you hope for, what you fear. But the more specific, the better in terms of things you think would be great to see in your downtown. I think I would welcome that tremendously in terms of feedback that I hope maybe distinguishes this a little bit from the last time you were talking master plans for Newport. So with that, I'm going to pause. The three of us are here for any questions, and we'll take notes if it seems noteworthy.
Thank you, Christine.
Okay, let me take this out of your way. I'll pause over here. I'll sit over here.
Hi, everybody. I've met many of you, but not all of you. I'm Rick Gufford Chase. I'm the director of Newport Downtown Development, and I'm just thrilled to have VHB working with us this summer. Just want to say a word about the context. So we signed a contract the city, signed a contract with VHB mid-June?
That sounds about right.
And end of June, somewhere around the middle of June. So
city or NEK-TV?
City.
Got it.
So the way this is working is the city sought and received funding to fund this project, and Newport Downtown Development signed a memorandum of understanding with the city council that we would take responsibility for managing the process with VHB, things like this event tonight being one example of many, actually. The timeline that we're on is pretty tight. Our plan is to have a draft of a final report by mid to late September that the city council will be able to consider, that will be available for others in the community to look at, and have yet another moment for kind of public engagement in response to that draft. And somewhere between probably the 30th of September and the middle of October, we expect that VHB will come back to us with a final version of a plan that we will then, the City Council and Newport Downtown Development's Economic Development Task Force, led by Dave LaForce, that configuration of partners will try to figure out what's the next best step, where do we go from here, and how can the city and Newport Downtown Development work together to take us to that next step. And I want to say, as I open us up to question and comment, that I'm really aware as I look around this room that many of you have been here for a very long time. You own businesses. Many of you live in Newport itself. Almost all of you at one time or another have been a part of a conversation like this. Some of you have been part of repeated conversations like this. And we are really aware that Newport, somebody said to me, it might have been Pam early on, if one more person, actually I'll clean this up for your sake, Pam. If one more person studies us and tells us to look to the lake, I'm going to slit my wrist, I think, was something close to a quote. Anyway, it was close. Yeah, exactly. I'm going to jump in the lake. She does that anyway. So the point is, we were really clear with VHB as we got started that we wanted to make sure that we built on those other things. So Brian Gray, who's in the back there, is a volunteer as our economic development coordinator for Newport Downtown Development. He read every one of, I think it was Brian, 18 different studies and reports that have been created since 2008 or 9. And he read them all and then created a master list of the gaps where he could see things that probably hadn't been addressed and some of the things he felt like were being said repeatedly. And he provided all of that to VHB before they began their work. So I just want to really assure folks that we are pretty aware that the point here is not to rerun something that's already been done. It's just to try and get us up to speed so that we have the tools we need to go after things like public-private partnership money so that we can actually begin to make continue to make some of these development projects happen. So having said that, we want to leave this as free form as we can, and Christina's done a marvelous job. We asked her to keep the first kind of presentation to 20 or 25 minutes so that we would have plenty of time for all of you to engage in an actual conversation. So what I'll ask, here the ground rules, are that if you have a question, you're welcome to give it context. Please keep it relatively tight so that we don't have somebody going on for 5 to 10 minutes when we could be getting the answers that we're looking for from VHB or giving them more input. And then if you've already spoken once, please hold back and let's give other people a chance. And I will go out of my way to say, before we hear from people who have already spoken, let's hear from anybody who hasn't spoken yet. So we'll make sure that those people who do their thinking quietly with their mouths shut get a chance to speak, as well as those of us like myself who do most of our thinking with our mouths open. So, yeah, which often gets me into trouble with my spouse who's in the room tonight. So I know that there's probably a lot of space. I'm just going to ask you to stand and speak loudly. We intentionally did not do this with a microphone. We didn't feel we needed it. If you need help projecting, I will repeat your question. And I think, Bevan, you're anxious to stand up and start us off.
Oh, I thought I would, just I'll ask the dumb question.
Please introduce yourself and any
I'm
context that would help people understand
Oh, sure.
how you work here.
Actually, I do work for NDD on helping Newport become a bicycle-friendly community. But my question is, how is this different from the municipal plan that the city has? And I may have missed that because I was running around. That was approved in 2022. Is it different? No. Sure. I may have missed that. I was running around. I apologize.
So the question is, how does this effort differ from the municipal plan created in 2022?
Thank you for that. This plan does not set about to create a new vision. It really sets about sort of where it stops, to look with a little bit more depth, a little less breadth into certain key questions, get a little more granular about how you would actually implement and how you actually move some of these questions in terms of key sites and new development.
Go ahead, Ann.
Hi, I'm Ann Shirello. I'm a resident of Newport. And what we never got to in almost any of the plans was how it was going to be paid for. And I hear you talking about the TIF. And we do have also a tax stabilization in Newport. And what I really find upsetting for our city with respect to that and our willingness to put out the public money, that means our money, to pay the debt back, is that when we have these private-public relationships, we seem to get too little. So if a business goes bad, one of these businesses goes bad, we pay for it. If it does well, we don't get enough back. In other words, if that business goes on to be $1 billion business, yeah, you might say, well, we get side effects from it. But I think that in the TIF concept, we should get some of that profit back. And I'm just asking you, can that be done? It's not ever heard of, but I would like to see it done so that we get some advantages.
Yeah. I think the thing I'd say is I think those formulas of where that money goes are not, they're not set by us, they're not set by the city. I think those are state formulas for how that's going to fiscally work. I think the goal is that it will be enough of an economic revitalization tool that it will bring things back. I mean, that's the premise, and that's what I think everyone's going to have to be on board with for this to go forward. And that's some of what our analysis is looking at, is what are the most economically viable things to be the most robust for this. But we can't mess with the actual funding formula.
Christine,
Yeah.
can I also say something about that? So the big thing to recognize with TIF, and I don't remember the numbers from the presentation from St. Albans, and I don't know, Michael, maybe you know these numbers off the top of your head. But a big advantage of TIF is when you do bring that economic development, I think St. Albans has the lowest property tax increase in the state of Vermont, as an example. And I don't know what their percentage of increase was this year.
0.7%.
So that's what we're striving for. That's what the community gets back. Because without TIF, we wouldn't be able to do these projects. And then without these projects, you'll never get property tax mitigation. So that's the big key to this to work.
This is dialogical, so if you want to keep following that same strand, feel free, and we can circle back to it as we go as well. Please, Donna?
Donna Constantia, a Newport resident. I was on the village steering committee in Heinsberg when we were still the stepchild of Chittenden South, and we used this whole formula. And we had rural development come, and we had community forums, and people told everyone what they wanted, and we made charts, and we made it all happen. We put sidewalks in. We just redesigned, took 7 secretaries of state, and we finally got traffic coming on 116. We redesigned Silver Street so people in Addison County could get into Chingham County. People wanted pharmacies, it's there. They wanted affordable housing. We laid out grids, there's streets, there's sidewalks. And TIF's made it happen. It's about infill. You take where you already have homes and you fill it with more, and you leave Vermont open. Because it's that 10-acre lot with a house slammed on it that's really killing Vermont. I hate to say it, I mean, it's everyone's dream. But so it can work, and it was wonderful. We brought buses there and everything. And kids from CVU didn't have to worry about going down Mechanical Road and getting hit. We put a sidewalk in. People call me the sidewalk lady. It can happen. So don't be afraid of it. Because you get so much back because you build this infrastructure, and then down the line, after you've, supported these partnerships, we paired with Champlain Housing Trust, and we just made it happen. But then you get that tax base, and it makes your taxes go down, and the property is no longer the stepchild of Julian Sauls.
But, I'm sorry, what was the town?
Heinsberg.
Heinsberg. And
Yeah.
you basically built a downtown, or built an area that.
Yeah, it was like a pass-through.
Yeah.
You just stopped at landmins and hoped you didn't get hit coming out.
Which is amazing. But Newport's already got this great framework.
It's already like so
from a
much ahead of
right.
where we were in Heinsberg.
Right.
We had to invent it. I mean, this
Which is much harder,
already
actually,
here.
than what we're
Don't be
doing.
afraid of it. It's a wonderful tool.
If I could just press a little bit further in, as I think about your question, I want to distinguish between my understanding of tax stabilization and tax increment financing, which are very different economic tools, right? Tax stabilization is a local effort to say this is a small business that we want to support because we believe it will help our, in this case, Main Street to become vibrant over time. And sometimes those work really well, and sometimes they hang on by their fingernails, and sometimes they fail. And when I've talked with, I've gotten to know Chip Sawyer, who does a lot of the design work for St. Albans Economic Development, because he's also the director of the Downtown Development Organization in St. Albans. And Chip says, look, I'll admit, we've done some of these that have not worked, and we can point to others that have worked really well. It's a mixed bag, and we believe it's still worthwhile to try and get the mix of businesses we want on our Main Street. But that's different than tax increment financing, because if tax increment financing works the way it's designed to work, then the way it's designed is you ask the public for permission to float a bond, to borrow money. You spend the money on some public infrastructure piece that you need in order for private developers to be attracted. And then the bond is paid back by the difference in the property tax at the point you begin the project and the difference in property tax at the point you end the project. Now that you've got, instead of a $2 million block across the street, a $40 million block across the street, right? And the difference in that taxation is what pays back the public bond over 15 to 20 years. And then, as Chip Sawyer says, then the grand list is forever, right? So a part of what he says is your payback on a TIF is that you're going to see that return for the following 80 years after that, at least in theory, which I think, we can point to both examples of where this has worked well in the state of Vermont and some examples of where it hasn't. And we can talk about some of those as well. And why hasn't it worked where it hasn't worked?
Rick, just to riff on that a little bit, I think Vermont has had TIFs for a long time. It's the last 15 years where you've really seen more success stories, I'd say, and I feel like there's been a learning curve even in the state of communities figuring out how to use this tool well. So I just think the moment is good. I also just want to add one thing on the TIF conversation is, one of the premises is if the market's not doing what you want it to do, this is a tool to help prompt it in that direction, right? In some ways, it's sort of a perfect case study of why they have them. If the market was just coming in and doing exactly what you wanted downtown, you wouldn't need it. You wouldn't need this, right? But it really does meet a lot of those tests of why do you need this tool? Because things are just sitting there, even though your zoning might say, yeah, come build it, but it's not enough. So this is that extra thing to push it over the line, hopefully.
Lori, thank you, Christine.
Yeah.
Lori Grimm, Newport City. I am one of those people who has said in this room and many others for the last 15 years and done this. And so I just want to make sure that I understand where we're going with this. So this might be a two-part question. What I'm hearing is you're looking at where Newport is now over the last couple of years with all of the things that you've listed. Plus we're looking at all of the studies that we've done and the possibility of what can come out of those studies and actually take place in this kind of environment with the funding that's available. And I guess what I'm asking is, are we actually going to take the steps to do those things? Because I can't help but to think, and I shared this with you earlier, that if some of that stuff we've done in 2008, 2010, 2012 had actually been worked on instead of set on a shelf, we'd be a little, other than just a park and some really great flowers, I think we'd be a whole lot farther ahead than we are now, and I would hate to be here 10 years from now asking the same question.
Is that a question?
I
Is
think
that
so.
a question?
It is, I want to know
I wanna
what the
know what comes up for
process,
you
I
when
guess,
she
what
asks
the
the
process
question.
is.
I appreciate that. You said something about looking at all the other plans. I think we're not trying to do everything in all the other plans. I think
no, sure.
this is meant to be consistent with this vision you've already laid out. And so maybe it's about what are next steps, right? So I think one of the things will be to look at, let's say, if we're going to do some site analysis of what could happen on certain sites, then the community can say, does this work under zoning? Why are we not seeing this? Here's an image to actually, and some math and some scale to think about and get our heads around and say, well, do we like that? And what are the tools to prompt that to happen? Is it a regulatory tool? Are there incentives? And then funding tools. Again, TIF's not the only one, but it's a big one. I think it will inform discussions about, well, what is the most suitable project. I don't think the TIF's not the only thing that will address those things. We're also going to address what are some other funding sources to start looking at. But again, I think there's a regulatory side. There's that infrastructure capacity side. If you want to grow and you don't have the capacity to do it, well, here's your delta, and how do we start working on that? So hopefully it starts to actually sort of get into the building blocks, so to speak, of how you build, rather than sort of, which I think is a very important stage of planning, that kind of higher level, what's our vision? I think this is not trying to recreate the vision, it's trying to move the vision. So hopefully these give you some tools. I think the goal is to give you some tools to start moving pieces of that vision.
And I think I would just add to that when you look at the requirements of all the financial sources, the funding sources, you really need specifics.
Yeah.
And if you look at the plans, they're great plans, but they're very broad. They're not very specific, right? So that's what we're really trying to do, is get very specific on what we want to see in the downtown corridor and be able to take that and move on to these financial tools to be able to start a process. And Rick and NDD have really boned up in terms of staffing and renewed vigor, I guess is the word, to really get this done. So there's someone actually leading the charge this time to ensure that whatever we come up with, we're going to work really hard to make it happen.
I see Pam and then Stan.
Yeah. I'm not trying to be obstructive here. What we've heard is a sort of overview of, we've got this great plan, except we don't know any of the specifics of that great plan. And we've got this wonderful means of funding. It's called a TIF, yay. Here's what it can do for us. It can do all these wonderful things. But that's sort of like snake oil. If you don't know what it's here for specifically, why would we buy into it? And I would ask that you don't forget that all of us in this room watched what happened across the streets.
Mm-hmm.
We've met a lot of snake oil.
Mm-hmm.
We saw it in action. We listened to all the hype. We got screwed. So we may be open in the end, but we're going to have a lot of questions along the way, and we have no specifics at this point to go on. So what is the plan?
So, thank you. Correct, you don't. I think we could have come back to you with specifics, and then you'd be right to say, you're right to point this out, what you just pointed out, but someone would be right to say, you've already come up with everything, and you didn't ask us earlier. And so we're here earlier, and there will be other opportunities to come. There'll be a draft. Certainly, if Newport moves forward with a TIF, there'll be a separate public process around that. So this isn't the end. This is to really talk to you about what we're trying to do, what we're hoping to do, get earlier input. This is going to move fairly quickly over the next month or so, but you'll have another opportunity to comment when the specifics hit. And more than that.
And so I want to go to Stan, and I see other hands in the room, but I just want to say tonight is an opportunity not just to try and be, not just for Christine or some of us from Newport Downtown or the city to try and educate all of you. It's a chance, we hope, for you to say to us, this is what you need to know we're concerned about as we make this plan. That was the whole point of the evening.
You just got that.
So I just want to be really clear. I'm hoping we still have 45 minutes tonight for you all to say specifically, these are things we want you to be thoughtful about as you're working on this plan. So Stan first.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Stan Chop. I have a property here in Newport, and I'd like to be specific about a site, and that would be the where the Walgreens is. What's the possibility of getting a hotel there, attracting people, and I'm thinking that we could build up, have a ripple effect with the rest of the town. But I'm not an expert, and what do you say about that, I guess?
Wow, we just got really specific. That's
Well, I keep hearing specific.
That's what we want.
I mean, I actually think that was, we welcome all the comments. I was hoping we'd hear specific things about sites and uses and what you really think you need in the community. So, yeah, anything's possible. We actually have talked pharmacies and that site. And so pharmacies generally as community resource and where they should they be, among other things. But could other things be there? We're talking waterfront plaza.
Yeah, I just wondering
Yeah.
of a hotel, a decent
Sure.
hotel that would attract people, you know. And
Yeah, I mean, I think, Michael, do you want, I see you, no, I didn't know if you were, okay, I didn't know if you were making like eye contact to look, yes, I mean, I think Newport's done some market analysis around hotels, I believe. Certainly from a what do we allow to happen, that's entirely possible if it's not even allowed now, but that's an easy fix to sort of set the plane for if we welcome this to come in. And then I do think there needs, certain uses do need some sort of assessment of will it work here, but I think you've laid the groundwork for that. I don't see
For a
why
hotel
not.
in particular.
Yeah, for a hotel in particular. So, and that's certainly a site where more could happen. I mean, that sort of seems glaringly possible to me, and I think there does need to be a community conversation about what do we want where, and is that what we want there? But certainly it's a possibility.
so I know some people say, oh, we can't lose the pharmacy, or we can't
Yeah.
lose this or that. I'm just wondering if that site's big enough for,
Sure.
you know, to keep the grocery store and a pharmacy and also have a hotel. Is that
I mean, I
something-
think in terms of acreage, absolutely. I mean, we don't. I don't think the owner of that site's in the room. There's other parties that would need to be interested in this as well. But it's certainly in terms of like room, yes, of course that's possible. And those are uses that could be downtown too. And I think Waterfront Plaza is a really important site to talk about
and
what we want
TIFs
there.
could be used for such a thing?
So TIFs don't build the project, the hotel itself. A TIF could be used for infrastructure to help the project happen, whether it's streetscape, sidewalks, we need more water there to make it work, that sort of thing.
Land acquisition.
Land acquisition for
Brownfields mitigation.
brownfields mitigation, absolutely.
Land acquisition, meaning to buy the property?
By the land. That's how St. Albans was successful. We worked on almost all of their TIF projects. And so, I mean, to be like flip with it, like they bought the land, did brownfield improvements or remediation, maybe that was necessary on certain sites, and then turned the land around to make the pro forma work better for the potential developer. Basically sold it to them for $1. And that sort of greased the skids. The developer came in, did their building, the project, whatever it was, and that sort of elevated it. And the first thing we did in the downtown was they moved the state office building, which was out of downtown, and moved it to the core. So we did a master plan that looked at a new state office building, parking garage, and hotel. And then literally the TIF funding paid for that to happen. The state agreed, state legislature was on the table, the governor at the time agreed, we're going into downtown, it'll promote economic development, state office building, parking garage, and then a hotel developer came in. And that was just one of the laundry list of things that have happened. But land acquisition was one of the big plays that they did to make the development projects work out in a more financially favorable way for the developers.
I vote we do that.
I second that.
Oh, did you second? I saw Kitty and then, is it Brian and Kitty? What's seat in the back?
Chris.
Oh, it's Chris back there. Thank you, Chris. So Kitty, Chris, and then Iso, I think.
Kitty Upper Chase, Newport, and my understanding of what you're trying to do is to look at particular sites and say, what's the best use of that site? And so there's waterfront property, and we have a supermarket and a pharmacy on it. Is that the best use of our waterfront property? And you're doing that at different places around and looking at what will be the most, what you say, catalytic, that can get the most for starting a TIF or whatever we start. Our first project is so critical in doing that. And so if you're asking for suggestions, I would love to see a YMCA. I would love to see, especially with a pool, if possible, so that at winter time there's ways for people to exercise, and that it's all generations, and that it really promotes a lot of foot traffic and people coming in and out. I really don't see enough of that on Main Street, and I don't know if it belongs on Main Street, but in terms of year-round and getting people together and offering classes and stuff for kids and for grown-ups and all of that, I'd like to see that.
Just to be clear, my wife and I have never had that conversation. Chris, go ahead.
Hi, Chris Mooney. Statement and a comment and a question. The comment, if you want specific questions, it may help people if you're on the map of the focus area. And then my question, I was at the watershed meeting the other day. I forget the name of the group working on Memphis-Magog Water Council. Maybe.
What Memphis-Magog Watershed Association?
They talked about one of the things they're doing is buying up land to try and move people out of like Q100 areas. And I'm wondering if...
What's Q100, Chris?
Q100 is basically a 100-year exceedance, so there's a 1% chance that any year you'd have that storm. And the reason that they focus on it is because a Q100 storm would mean there's a 30% chance a home in that area would have a flood during the mortgage period. And so what I'm wondering is, does this plan intend to take that into consideration so that the assets that we build and put in place are resilient and not necessarily going to need big funding in the immediate future? I mean, Memphis-Magog's a huge basin, and the city necessarily shouldn't see huge issues, but there is stormwater considerations that come into play.
Sure. We have not been thinking about floodplain issues. And I think in part because we've been thinking about the existing built environment and how it might be rebuilt upon rather than, say, a greenfield site or something like that. But that's a fair question. I think it would probably be pretty easy to sort of look at where those areas are, just to see how they are intersecting with what we're doing, and it just has not been part of our charts so far. But I think that data is readily available, so we can lay it over and certainly point it out as something for the community to be aware of with these recommendations as well. I wanted to, if I may, there was a comment about people walking, bringing uses in that will bring people walking around downtown, and I think that's just a very important point to pause on, because when we think of, how are we thinking about highest and best use? There's a number of, there are different ways to think about that. One aspect of that is, what will the sort of spillover be? I think we have to remember our context, and we're talking largely about our downtown area. And that uses that bring that sort of foot traffic will have sort of a spillover for other businesses as well, and just the general experience of being downtown where you want that vibrancy. And so I think that's just an important thing to think about. Different uses bring different amount of activity, and we certainly want activity. So I think that's high on our minds as well, too.
Isa?
My name is Isabel Marks, and I'm a Newport Center resident for the last 25 years, but Newport is the focus of almost everything I do. I've also been around long enough to have been on the committees in 2008 and seen many of them. And I guess I am somewhat discouraged. I'm happy to see that there's some interest in a way forward, but I really want to see something happen, not just talked about. And if I had my wish list, I would like to see independent senior housing on Main Street, where the hole in the ground is, so that the housing is upstairs, retail's downstairs. It's a built-in market for stores. And for someone like me who is at that age, I can't stay in this area for many more years unless that's available to me, and there's nothing. You know, there is low-cost housing. I don't need low-cost housing, fortunately. But I will need some kind of housing where I don't have to drive any distances, where I don't have to drive at night, and where all the services that I need are close to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
And you can be car-free.
That's right.
So are there people who haven't spoken who would like to let something rise to the top? Kyle, go ahead.
Kyle Chadburn, I'm outside of Coventry, just over the line though, so I think I kind of count. Mine's kind of a curiosity, I guess, and it's kind of a two-part interconnected curiosity. When you're talking about TIF projects or you're talking about revitalization projects in general, I'm wondering how often do they focus on pre-existing infrastructure as opposed to building new infrastructure? And I guess connected to that, how much focus is there on bringing in new business as opposed to expanding currently existing businesses, whether it's a secondary location for a business or whether it's expanding a retail space into a larger space or those kinds of things?
Well, one thing I'd say is I don't think there's no prohibition on either new infrastructure versus improved infrastructure, but there is locational criteria that that prioritizes downtowns and centers, which then leads you to the idea that a lot of that is going to be improving existing infrastructure. But I don't think categorically it's off the table to be building entirely new things. What else? Michael, I am going to look to you for your St. Albans work, because I think it's relevant as far as brand new versus renovations or expansions of existing things. Have you seen both there?
So when we did the downtown core master plan, we did the streetscape improvements. A lot of the utility infrastructure was upgraded through the corridor. They didn't necessarily increase capacity because that wasn't an issue for them, whether it was water or sewer, but they did improve the underground infrastructure that was in place, recognizing we're going to do all these incredible streetscape improvements, so we don't want to tear this up in 10 years because there's a water line break or a sewer line thing happened. And then they looked at doing, getting back to the stormwater consideration, a lot of the buildings along Main Street had roof lines that were tied into the storm system, and so for water quality, they were doing a disconnect. And so they were pulling the water lines coming off the roof out of the sewer system and putting it into the storm system. So they did sort of roof line disconnects in the downtown core. So they looked at a variety of improvements that would sort of benefit the community long term.
I would assume that kind of opens up possibilities for different kinds of businesses to be in that space too, when there is a more efficient infrastructure in place.
Sure, I mean, I can remember when we first started up there, it was like early 2000s, and the first initial visioning stuff was like, downtown was tired, right? It was just, you know, infrastructure was sort of delayed, you know, the streetscape was pretty sad, and we're walking around like, wow, we can really do something here. Very similar to what we have here. Actually, you're sort of in a better place already with your sort of streetscape and the beautifications that have happened. And I remember I live in Franklin County in Fairfax, just down the road. So I was out to dinner one night with my wife after the Main Street was done, and sitting there, and I overheard these people beside me, and this guy's like, man, this is not the St. Albans I remember. And so people see that, and there was a recent article about some of the stuff going on in Burlington, and people are saying, you gotta go to St. Albans, that's where you wanna be, like, it's safe, you can walk around with your kids and your family, it's walkable, it's friendly, people are welcoming. So I think all of these things do add up over time, and it's incremental improvements, and things just spiral and snowball, and one thing happens that leads to another, to another, to another, and so I think the community just will leverage what you have for your assets, and you're gonna see incredible improvements, especially if the TIF dollars are spent wisely and leveraging what you have.
Go ahead, Helen.
Eleanor Leger, I'm Katie's sister.
Among other things.
I own a house right over there, and my business is right over there. Rick has heard me say this many times, so this is not for you, just as you know so people know where I stand, owning a business right on Main Street downtown. That we moved to downtown in 2013. We are now 11 years in, and it is no better. You know, we're a small town in a remote county. There are not a lot of people here, and we can talk about, when we have talked about bringing in businesses, or, you know, at one point there was an economic development committee that was like, oh, let's just go out and market to businesses, and then we'll offer them a tax incentive to come here. It's like, I would be the first to tell them, don't come here unless you can survive on a retail traffic population of 3 people a day. Like, it doesn't work. So from my perspective, the critical thing is housing. Just as Izzo said, we need people who live here, more of them, if any business is gonna come here and be able to survive. I'm only here because 99% of my product goes out my back door in a truck to someplace else.
Go ahead.
So you've been doing a lot of research and over our plan. What is your plan for those businesses coming in and staying in business, not because of their failure, but because of things like theft and less attractive population in the area of Main Street?
Can I just say, in 11 years, that's not a problem.
It's not?
No. Do you own a business downtown?
No, I work for the paper, but I've seen
Yeah.
businesses go out, so I was just asking.
Yeah, that's not the issue.
It's fair to know. Thank you.
I'll come right back to you. Anybody else who hasn't spoken yet, go ahead, John.
Yeah. John Manette, I just wanted to point out that Newport actually already has an example of a successful TIF district. Some years ago, the area on the Derby Road where Harvest Equipment and the factory next door, that came about because of a TIF district. The infrastructure was installed for those buildings. Neither of those businesses existed in the area prior to TIF. Between them, I don't know exactly how many people they employ, but I guess between the two it would be somewhere over 100. Those jobs wouldn't exist but for that development. And people were concerned about the benefits of TIF. To me, one of the obvious benefits that comes from those projects is that you have 100-odd salaries being spent predominantly in the local area that wouldn't exist otherwise, which impacts all of the other businesses and service providers in the community. So you have the ripple effect from all of those jobs.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I want to see.
Actually, can you introduce yourself?
Oh, yes, sorry. My name is Lynn Rubley. I grew up here. I moved back here 11 years ago because of the development, particularly the conference center on the waterfront. And I'm still here. Anyways, I want to see indoor recreation for kids. Like, that's something that we really lack in the winter, not only for kids, but, you know, people like me too. that we don't have, and also a performing arts space, you know, to bring people here and do things. We've got a lot of little things happening here and there, but a real facility for that. And there was a third thing that I've already forgotten. But anyways, but I think bringing people from a little further afield into town, you know, they'll come to something recreational that they can do and artistic, something artistic that they can do. And we don't really have those. Oh, I know, that's what John just made me think. Right, and the other thing, I've also been working with the watershed about doing, and MEMSEC, about a science center. So having there's talk about having the Gateway as a science center, but I think, you know, another building that actually has a bigger space for a science center is important too. So education, recreation, and the arts, those are my priorities.
And the conference center was what you started with, the conference center?
Yes, that vision was something that my father held in 1972 when Pomerleau first bought that lot. So I'm really want to see something else there besides box stores whose back ends face the waterfront.
The dumpsters and the
Half the Newport for the dumpsters.
Half those buildings are empty.
Okay, I'm going to open it up, and Ann and then Lori, I think, both wanted to speak. Go ahead, Ann.
Well, I wanted, as you spoke, you talked about, you know, building the infrastructure, and then they will come. But how much what if they don't come? So how much commitment do you get from the business before you invest the local money in the loans that give you the infrastructure?
I think there would be a project. I think you get as specific as you can in terms of here's a project for a site in the works. So I don't know how much they have to be sort of legally committed, but usually there is a developer already at the table when you're proposing a TIF. Generally, that's my understanding of how it works. So it's not super vague of we hope this will happen. Usually there is sort of a partnership in the works and in discussion when that's moving forward, so that there's other people at the table and it's not an abstraction. And yeah.
Do you want to add to that, Dave?
Yeah, and what I would say that the important thing to know about TIF is there's a very limited timeline. You have 10 years, and it's 10 years from the moment you submit your application. So it is our hope, after we get this master plan completed VHB, that it's our hope to apply for next April 2025. But if we do that, we have 10 years from April 2025 to there to complete those projects. So it's absolutely critical that we have more than likely a project ready as we're applying for that application for TIF, the TIF district. It's absolutely critical. But obviously nothing will happen unless we have a concrete contract with a developer to do a project.
It's a great question. Bevan and then Lori.
Yeah, really quick. So you're applying for a district, so it could be multiple projects in one application?
Correct. Correct. Go ahead, Lori.
So in 2017, 2018, I was part of Newport, and I know that several of my other fellow committee members are here. And we specifically looked at the whole marketing aspect because we know we need housing and we know we want another indoor recreation, but we also know that many businesses have been approached over the last 10 or 12 years and have said, we don't have enough population. And what I learned through the Newport was all of the people who live in the other half of the circle, which is Canada. And so I guess what I'm asking is, what kind of marketing are we going to move into if we're looking at starting to do the TIF stuff in 8 months? And how are we going to convince them because YMCA said no to us, and my understanding, years ago when IROC went under. And because they didn't want a building here, we didn't have enough people. And they said, you can do community stuff, but we're not coming. Other people looked at the building, said, you're not large enough. Other stores, Target was approached years ago, they won't come here. People in New Hampshire, I know of a company in New Hampshire that owns a few stores, and they went to Chittenden County instead of coming here because we don't have enough population. So where are we in the marketing of, we have population, we just don't all live in the United States?
So I'll just say, Lori, I agree entirely, and I'd say Newport Downtown Development is making some baby steps right now, exploring what that looks like. Over the last year and a half, we've been intentional about building relationships in what we call the Binational Tourism Working Group. So we're working with colleagues from the MRC, Memphremagog, which is their kind of version of a county organization. And we're doing maps together to kind of get people to begin to think about this region as a whole. Lynn's work with the Canusa 360 Arts Collaborative is another example where we're trying to get people to think not about what a 180 community looks like below the border, but a 360 community. And the airport's going to be another key part of that conversation, right? If we've got the second longest runway in the state, as I understand it, we beat Rutland by a foot. And one of the questions is, how do we develop that airport as a resource that can support this community? And it's not going to be done solely on the strength of what exists in the northern part of the NEK, right? It's also going to depend on the fact that Sherbrooke and Magog and even places closer to Montreal are going to look here if we had a decent small regional airport as an opportunity. So all of those things are a piece of the puzzle. I'll just give the latest example. We wrote a grant this summer to the state through what they called their transformational tourism grants. And we got a grant that had a third of the overall money was to build out these carts that some of you may have seen at the Wednesdays on the Waterfront we've been rolling out the last couple of weeks. But actually the bulk of the grant, assuming we get final approval, we're waiting for the final approval from the federal government, but assuming we get that final approval, the next step is to hire a company on the Quebec side of the border to teach us what marketing looks like on the Quebec side. How do we market to both French and English-speaking Quebec? And we've got $30,000 written into that to help us learn that over a period of 6 months and then begin to replicate it with another $36,000 in that grant. So none of this is big enough to do the kind of turn the corner things you're talking about, but all of it is experimenting so that when we're ready to start having those conversations, it's not coming out of nowhere. And the last thing I'll mention is this summer we've put a lot of effort into this program that we've been calling Ambassadors, where we, Dave will tell you stories about when he was a kid, watching the boats from Canada line up 20 deep out here at the marina to get gas, and how both 9/11 and then COVID have kind of conspired over time to really kind of make that dry up. And one of the things we were really struggling with was how much of a barrier it seemed for people from Canada to come in by boat and not know how they could get off their boat with customs and border protection rules, right, and start moving around. So Dave and some of the members of our Economic Development Task Force reached out, did some very concrete problem solving, and created videos to help people understand how to use the tools that are available. And we've actually cut the amount of time necessary to complete these online applications through an app on your phone from anywhere. They were running anywhere between 20 minutes and 2 hours, and now they're running less than 10 minutes on average. Every once in a while there's an exception, but mostly those things are being dealt with right away. And yesterday we handed beautiful big posters, laminated posters in French and English to a friend here in Newport who boats on this lake, up and down the lake. He actually lives on his boat in the summer, and he's taking them out to marinas all the way along the lake on the northern side of the border. Just beginning to say, Newport's open for business. We'll help you. If you have a bad experience, we want to know about it. Let's solve these problems together. So all of those don't feel to me like the level that you're really talking about. They're really just beginning to seed the territory so we can think more creatively and more expansively in the future. Go ahead, Lynn.
2 questions. One, does anybody know what percentage of people from Quebec come and shop at Walmart?
I don't.
because you know, when I was a kid and we had Mammoth Mart, it was probably 50% people from Quebec came and shopped
The
there.
Canadian dollar was worth more.
This is
A lot
true.
more.
Right, this is
Yeah.
true,
Right now
right,
it's
so
$80.
that's something that keeps them, but I guess that would be a good thing to know, is what percentage of people from Quebec do come and shop there. And the second question, have there been any developers that have come to the table and shown interest in doing something here?
Short answer, without being very specific, is yes. There are several developers who expressed interest, and we're having initial conversations, both at the level of mayor and council, and also at the level of the Economic Development Task Force for Newport Downtown Development. And we know that we have to have those conversations simultaneously with the process of receiving this report, because if we want to do the TIF work next spring, we need to have our first development ideas and partners lined up. We can't start the process. One kind of, not horror story, but a difficult story is of a community that went after a TIF, got their acceptance as a TIF, and then it took them, I think it was 4 to 5 years before they were able to line up their first project and their first developer. And we don't want to do that, because then you've used up, as Dave says, you've used up half your time. So our goal, we are starting those conversations intentionally already to try and make that happen. Let's go to the back first and then come back to you, Stan. Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Nathaniel Johns. And my wife and I moved here to Newport a couple of years ago from Montana, largely because we got pushed out. I was born and raised in Montana and always intended to spend my life there, but there was a huge push to increase growth and development that was very successful, but it also pushed out the local residents and the local businesses. And I'm very concerned about that happening in Newport as well. You know, we have all these chain stores that are funneling money not only out of the community but also out of the state. And so I do have a question, and my question is what kind of analyses you're doing in this planning to ensure that these things are actually going to help the residents of Newport beyond just an increase of tax base. But what are you doing to ensure that residents here aren't going to be pushed out either through higher housing costs? Because yeah, housing supply is an issue, but you know, if you increase housing supply, it only helps people if you're not having unsustainable growth alongside that.
Great questions.
Yeah, that was, I mean, those are really challenging questions. So there isn't, I mean, you're getting at sort of questions around gentrification and rising housing costs, and what are the tools available. And I think there's a sort of other economic points you made around box stores and where is money going in a community. So I think there's probably two parts to that. I think one of the, there's nothing in the plan work right now that speaks specifically about local businesses versus not local businesses, but it's a fine point, and I think there's probably room in there to sort of acknowledge the need to sort of support a local business base, even if there are non-local businesses in the mix as well, and give some thought to sort of tools and acknowledgement of that in your downtown. The residential piece, you know, I don't have a firm answer, except that I think where our analysis is going is that, again, as I sort of talked about a little bit before, that kind of diversity of housing choice and supply is really critical, I think, to serving a lot of different people in the community. So you're not just building one type, and you're not just hitting one market. And I think that's one piece of it. I think there are other pieces around how affordable housing is done in terms of, you know, there are other tools to guarantee affordable housing outside of the market, and that's a piece of any community's puzzle. I don't have a silver bullet answer to that, but I think we can certainly acknowledge that this is an issue about an upswing, and point to different tools community use to try to support stabilization, what I'll call neighborhood or city set stabilization as well. Inclusionary zoning is one of those tools that communities use all across the United States. So inclusionary zoning is a requirement that a market rate development have some share of affordable housing in it. How inclusionary zoning works really varies depending on the details of how that's dialed in. You don't, I think one of the issues with inclusionary zoning, if you make the requirements so high on the affordability piece, it can thwart market rate development and interest. So if there's already a challenge with building, financial challenge for developers to build, inclusionary zoning can be tough because you're asking them to do a little more financially as well. But I think there's lots of different ways to do an inclusionary, and I've seen it, including in my own town, work very, very well to bring in mixed income projects. So that's a great tool. We can certainly mention it as kind of suite of tools available to communities grappling with just these issues. When it's done well, I'm a fan. Yes.
Bevan?
It was a great time for me because I lived in that same town as Nathaniel over a 20-year period, so I think most of your childhood. And I watched a town be ruined and transformed. And I want to bring up transportation because that's what I do. I was a bike advocate in said town as well and wrote an article 20 years ago telling them what their town was going to look like in 20 years based on their population projections. And basically what I thought might happen without good planning was the town, biking was a form of transportation when I lived in this town in the 90s, and it is now almost impossible to ride a bike in that town for transportation, and that's kind of was one of the main modes for a lot of people that live there, so not to mention how much the houses cost. But so what I love about the TIF, it seems like the streetscaping, and it's almost like livability is kind of a base value in it, or I don't know how you guys would describe that, so that's really exciting for me, because I don't want to live in a town that gets so congested that I can't ride my bike to get places. Yeah, most of the comment. Yes.
That's a comment, but I think to your point about queuing in on that transportation and infrastructure piece, absolutely focusing on one of the things you could focus on as a community is we want to ensure that we have safe means for multiple modes of travel. Absolutely valid thing to have part of your plan.
Yeah, especially when you have a town layout like this. It's quite water and bridges.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just, Nathaniel, I just want to follow up a little bit on your point too. One of the things that we talk a lot about on the board of Newport Downtown Development is that we are not primarily trying to market and promote Newport to outsiders, to tourist dollars. It's a piece of the puzzle, right? And when we talk about a four-season outdoor recreation economy, which is kind of a mantra for us, that's certainly a piece of what we're looking for. But one of the things we are really clear about as a board is that the people in this community have been living the four-season outdoor recreation economy for generations, and they love it. And it's a lot of why they chose to locate and stay in this community. And so a lot of what we're really trying to build is the kind of community that we know that folks like my cousins and aunts and uncles in Westfield and Lowell have always been looking to Newport for in the past. So I don't know that we're ever going to see, I don't expect that we're going to see, the heart of people's household economy on Main Street the way Newport was 50 years ago. On the other hand, it seems entirely possible to us, now that we've had a little bit of experience the last couple of years, that we can create destination experiences, even for locals, that will help them continue to see Newport as a core for their community life. So, the most important example of that is when Newport Downtown Development didn't exist anymore about 3 years ago, we began with Sarah calling together a bunch of people she knew who were all her age and younger and saying, we sat down at Eden and everybody got something to drink, and I just said, you don't know me, but I'm just going to take notes, and I want to hear you reflect on the question, what's not here that you wish was here, right? And they just started talking, and we came up with the Winter Saturdays in Newport. And the whole point of Winter Saturdays was to make it accessible to families with activities for kids that were easy for them to participate in, a local band that people liked, local food that supported a local restaurant, and a cash bar, all for right now, I think last season we charged $15 a head, right? And so for $30, a couple and their kids could come in and have an actual night out. And what we discovered was, if you create those kinds of experiences, people from Barton and Lowell and Westfield and Irisburg and Newport and Derby and Holland, all these folks will come here to have those experiences the same way they do for Wednesdays on the waterfront. You know, people kept telling me, oh, I don't know, you know, it's awfully cold in Newport in the winter, nobody's going to come out. And I'm thinking, you know, I grew up watching my crazy grandparents and my aunts and uncles get on beat up old piece of shit snowmobiles at 1 o'clock in the morning and go out when winter was a lot different than it is right now, actually. So you can't tell me that Vermonters won't go out when it's cold. The question is, why are we not providing the things that give them a place to go? And that has to be a foundation for whatever development we're going to do here. It has to relate first to the people who have lived here historically and to their value system. And then other people will come and we will wrestle, I guarantee, with those questions around the cost of housing going up. And we're going to have to be really intentional about those things. But we know where we're starting. We still have a few more minutes. This is your chance, y'all. Who else wants to say something? Go ahead, Kyle.
One other question was just thinking, I work in education, and so we've seen a lot of teachers come and a lot of teachers go. And I think that's true in the healthcare profession as well. And so I'm just curious, like, is there any part of this process that reaches out to some of those major kind of big scale employers in our area to get a sense from workers of like, what are the things that are missing that might be the reason why you're not staying? Because we see a lot of people come and a lot of people go. So
that's great. That's a great question. So one of the things we're doing as part of this process is having some stakeholder conversations. So actually just trying to sample people who represent different quarters here, including some major employers, to ask some of those questions about what do you think your workforce needs? What do you think they go downtown for example? And so that's going to be coming up, but that's on our minds too. And I think that's a great way of framing it, and we're interested as well, including folks doing in education and hospital.
Go ahead, Lori.
So just thoughts, Coventry Street, making it, building that up in a different way, taking down some of the old buildings to create a nicer entrance into Newport. There's so much stuff over there that's not being used and could be done differently, I think. And then you and I had a conversation half a year ago or more about the building on the corner downtown and what can go in there with a rotting roof and how to,
you're talking about the J.J. Newberry apartments.
yeah, the Newberry business, yeah. So, you know, because those are, we have a building, I don't know what the usability of it is, but, you know, besides our growing garden over here, you know, we need to think about other spaces, and those are two I think about.
So,
go ahead.
Just so I know, we're talking the corner of Main and Seymour? Seymour. Yes, got it. Yes, that's on our list.
Chris, you want to add to that?
I was going to say a counter idea to Coventry Street would be connecting the walking and bike paths, taking advantage of the impacts that stormwater will likely play along that corridor, expanding that as a bike route and finding a way to loop up to West Main Street, thus connecting all of Newport to those bike paths.
That's intriguing. Yeah, thanks, Chris. Go ahead, Anna.
It's going to sound like Field of Dreams, but I think if you build it, they'll come. We had the biggest dance hall in New England, in Newport. I say we bring it back.
You have to know that Dan Robbins is going to be people in Newport. So. Other comments, questions? Go ahead.
The sewer plant, the water treatment plant, and the water tower. So you had a picture of it. Is any of this dealing with that, growing, improving, or is that part of this, or is this different?
To the extent that we're talking to the city about what do we think existing capacity is now, so we have a sense of what your baseline is, and we're still we're still waiting on a little bit of data, I think, but that is one of the questions we're putting in there to sort of set that context of, here's existing capacity, what's the implication of that for growth? Is there room there to grow, and if not, what does that mean? Because you can build capacity, but what are the tools to do?
Mayor Sullivan, I wonder if you might want to just speak to the water tower, just for folks who may not know what's going on with that project. Do you want to say a word about that? No. The city's been working on plans for a while, and there is a new water tower that's construction is just beginning.
Yeah, and it's still, it's all going to happen, but right now it's in different phases.
Yeah, but yes,
But I think
clearly.
more importantly, and I don't mean to interrupt, is the gentleman's question about capacity. And I know that you did reach out to the city, and some of the people who were going to provide that information to you were out on vacation, and you should be getting that information.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Just about to wrap up here. Go ahead, Chris.
You had mentioned transportation, various intersections, and improving parking. I was wondering if there were specific considerations at this point, or was it they just talking points?
Sure, there are some. So I know when we were here in July, it was July, we did stop and pause by a number of key intersections and sort of think about them both from a sort of sense of place perspective. How does this feel as you're entering town, and from a movement of vehicles and people perspective as well. And so we got a couple of big circles there. We're Coventry in Maine, School and 3rd in Maine. Yes, and a few others, and Seymour Street itself, and how it sort of plays. Or is it a lane or is it a street? Street? Lane, Seymour Lane, excuse me. The role it plays in terms of overall circulation. So we did spend a bit of time thinking about intersections and which were ripe for that could benefit from some improvements. Yes. And you had a second part to that question, parking. Yes, I mentioned parking as being super important to any downtown. One of the discussions we had was, there are a number of surface parking lots in town, and is there some possibility to use parking spaces a little more efficiently? Structured parking, some sort of consolidation, so you could use some of that really valuable space for different things besides parking. So that was part of the discussion, and will be noted and included in recommendations as well. May I ask a question of the crowd? Do folks here feel like there's a parking problem? Does anyone? Or no? You're not? Okay, that's good to know.
The eclipse was rough.
There were no clips. That's good.
That was rough.
Yes. Go ahead.
Can I explain why some people say there's a parking problem?
Please.
Because I experienced it as a business. People want to be able to park right in front of where they're going.
That's why you're right.
And I'm like, can somebody please invent the Mary Poppins parking space where you can just keep adding cars in and then just magically pull yours out? But from my perspective, it's like if you go to Hanover, New Hampshire, you've got the diagonal parking, which just means you can get more, like 3 cars in front of where people want to go in instead of just one.
Building parallel space.
Yeah, but I personally agree, there's tons of parking, but the reason strip malls are so successful is people are like, oh, look, I can park in front of where I'm going.
But what boggles my mind is that then they'll often walk twice as far across that parking lot
Exactly.
as they would if they were walking half
Exactly.
But they can see
Exactly.
it. Right, and they can see it. That's right.
They'll hike a mile at Walmart.
Exactly. I totally get it.
But there was a study that redesigned Main Street with angled parking. So
One of the many studies.
So, Christine, I wonder if we might have you close with just a word about your process between now and the end of September, and what engagement might look like for folks in the room who are really interested.
Sure. So I'm actually putting your name up We have cards with us as well, but I think Rick, as sort of a conduit, makes a lot of sense. We're gonna, my colleagues have been taking notes. We're gonna take all of this, write it up, include it somewhere in the report as far as things we've heard. We're going to be having some stakeholder conversations to just have something like this in a slightly different way. So again, talking to people from who represent, say, different sectors, different parts of the community about their questions, concerns, hopes for this. And then in September, we will be presenting on sort of key findings, recommendations. It's not a final report, but we'll have some draft material for feedback, which we will then put into our final report. And so, yes, there will be a window where there will be a comment period where we will welcome feedback at that point as well. And then if you have more coming off of this, please do write, and we will be in communication with Rick, or if there's things you think of after this, or you're feeling shy, and we welcome all of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll just say kind of a final word, which is that, when you go on Google Maps, it's discouraging when the property across the street comes up labeled The Hole, right? But I want to say one first, it's not the only part of what we're talking about here. As you can tell, we're really trying to think holistically. And I've been insisting that we're going to call that the development opportunity across the street, right? But when we call it The Hole, for me, what I recognize is that it speaks to trauma and what happened to the psyche of this community over the last decade. This, along with a number of other things that kind of conspired to create a situation where people can feel really discouraged. And I am not here to try and convince anybody that that discouragement isn't real or valid. But I do think that there's momentum that is different right now than it's been for quite some time. It's not that it's never happened in Newport before. In fact, there was a time there from like 2008 to 12 or 2013 in particular, where there was a lot of vibrancy going on and a lot of excitement and enthusiasm. What we've got right now is a mayor and council who are not arguing about whether or not these are the directions we need to go. They want to see stuff happen. And we've got a planning commission that's working on zoning revisions that will allow us and encourage us to go the directions we want to go. And we've got people in the community who are saying, okay, I've got the energy to try again right now. And we've got Newport downtown development kind of coming alive again. And we've got new people who have come into town and are here because they were attracted, I think, like Nathaniel described, by a lot of the values that have grounded this community for a very long time. And we've got this beautiful spot, right? We've got all of that working for us. So I hope that you all will stay as engaged as you can find the energy for. And if you've got concerns, if you just need to vent, we will vent with you. Well, come and vent with us, right? Let's get that stuff out on the table, because there's a lot of instruction in it, too, about things that we've thought about in the past that might have worked and didn't, or that should have worked and were never tried. We want to hear about those things. And I'll just ask if we could, people are welcome to stay and have a conversation with Jeff and Michael and Christine and any of us. And I want to say, if you could just join me in thanking them for making that long trip, actually all three of them, to be with us tonight, and for the work that they're doing on our behalf. That's it. Y'all can go home now.